Welcome to the Railway Laser Lines Backscene Warehouse video. I'm just going to show you now what you get in your kit. Make sure you're familiar with it all. So on the left hand side we start off with our skeleton pieces. So on here is our back panel, and you'll notice down the bottom left this length here is slightly shorter in length to the one on the right hand side. So this distinguishes between right and left, big side right, smaller side left, and that's duplicated with the base and the front panel as well. We've also got your skeleton roof, your 4 internal roof trusses for added support, and your 2 side panels. So prime all these in the colour of your choice, and obviously do the roof skeleton one side, allow it to dry, and then paint the other side. We've also got in the double O gauge kit a little jig. We don't get this in the O gauge, because the O gauge kit you can see what you're doing. You don't need that, so I've just included this little jig which will allow you to input your front brickwork basically inside it, and then that will allow you to fit your exterior brick buttress, your ledges, lintels and windows to make your life a lot easier, hopefully. You've got your corrugated roof, which will need to be primed. Obviously your brickwork will need to be primed, but I suggest that you glue the exterior out bricked first and then prime it. You've also got a strip that goes on the top ledge here, which is your gutter strip. We've got 5 windows, 3 non-opening and 2 opening. We've got 5 panes of glass, and these come with film on both sides. So one's clear one side and one's a frosted on the other side, but they both need to come off unless you want to leave them on. You've got 5 lintels, 5 window ledges, 4 mini windows, although we've only got 2. I will most probably put 4 in a kit because they're tiny, and you might lose them. And obviously then the 2 side opening sections. Now when you add your glass to your back of your window, you'll then need to glue this part to the edge of the glass, and then obviously add the side window to the side of this piece, but I'll show you later in the video. So that's all the parts. So you can prime all the parts on the left, you can prime your brickwork. I use a Halford's red oxide primer, but you can use other primers if you want to. You can also then prime your windows, you can prime your ledges and lintels, so there's a fair amount to prime. But that's all your kit, and we'll see you shortly once those have all been primed. The front brickwork has 2 sections, so it's the back panel, and then you've got your overlay which will glue in these lines. Now obviously there isn't a downside to this one, but there is to this one, because this is a part of a pack that you would use this for a left end against either the end panel of your baseboard or against another building. I will be doing other ones where it won't have these either end, so you can use this as a separate one all by itself. But the idea is then once you've bought one, if you bought another one, you can then literally butt this one up against the next one, and it'll look like a continual flow. Ideally these need priming. I normally use a red oxide Halford's primer, then I can give it a quick go over with some white gloss. Again, use it for, go to the pound shop and buy one of their pound gloss spray paints, spray it white just to give it a light coating. That will protect the MDF and stop your next paintwork from going into the MDF. I then give it another coat of red paint, and then obviously it's a case of dabbing different color reds and browns on your bricks. But you could, because it's only a small section, you could just simply use your acrylic paints and paint over it and see how you get on. Once you've painted it, give it a matte varnish, and then obviously then you can do the mortar mix using methods of your own choice. I tend to use the filler method, but I might try some different methods. So that's what we'll do. So there's not a huge amount to paint, so you can go and give those first of all a coat of red primer. You might want to glue them on So glue them into position, make sure they're an exact fit, so they fit snugly at the bottom, flush on the side and flush on that side as well. Give it a coat of red primer and then we can go from there. When you come to do your windows, best thing I'd find is double siding up some masking tape, putting it on flat surface and then literally putting the edges of the windows around it, so when you come to spray them they're not going to blow anywhere. And also we've got those pieces to do as well, so I'll separate those and put them on a piece of masking tape and do those as well. And obviously allow those to spray at a distance and it gradually coats it. I don't want them too close up, you get runs in them or it'll be too thick. You only really want a light coat on these, and I'll allow those to dry for 24 hours. I'll then remask, turn them over and reprime the other side, allow that for 24 hours to dry as well. There's no point rushing these because these are going to be one of the focal points of windows, and we don't want to get too much paint on them. Okay, so they're all done. They've been primed on both sides, obviously allowed to dry the first side. I've remasked, and then these have been dry now for just over 24 hours, so these are ready to take off. I'll put them to one side and they'll be ready to fit into the brickwork framework. Now on the 00 gauge you'll need to add the glazing to this open window prior to fitting them, because you're going to need to fit this part on the back of the glazing right there, and obviously right there, and then obviously fit the glazing inside these ones and then glue from the side onto the side of that one. On the O gauge version the framework is slightly bigger obviously, so we can actually fit this piece onto the frame there, and then obviously fit your glazing and then bond your window to the side. When you fit that into the framework, once it's all done, you can then actually use the glazing with the hole and slide it over the top while it's inside. I'll try and explain that a bit later when I show you, but you don't need to put the glazing on to fit those. You can if you want to, I suppose. It's not the end of the world. Find the best way for you, but I found that I can actually fit it on the framework and then fit the glazing afterwards. But the 00 gauge you need to fit the glazing first. The skeleton framework has all now been primed, and I've also primed both sides of the skeleton roof. I've also primed the base, but then I've gone over it with a concrete spray from a company called Rust-Oleum. I thought I'd give that a try, and I have masked around the outsides because obviously this is a stipple paint, and I don't want it going on there because otherwise it will most probably affect the joins of the framework. I have allowed in the drawing for a small amount of paint work on here, but if you want to mask it up, please do. It's entirely up to you. I've got to paint these before I put the skeleton frame together. I've primed a red oxide primer on the bricks and the buttresses. I've yet to do the gutter strip and the corrugated roof, and I also need to do the lintels and ledges. I've sprayed the windows white both sides and also done the small windows and the small window side piece. So I'm going to go and paint those both sides. Once that's dry, then we can come back and we can then put the skeleton frame together. The roof supports have now been painted matte black both sides. They're nice and dry, so now we can concentrate on building the skeleton frame. That's the roof supports glued into the back. You might find that when you add glue into the little holes, that when you push these in you'll get some glue down the side, so just get a damp brush and wipe down and get rid of any excess glue, and do the same with around the sides. Any excess glue inside just wipe off with a soft brush that's slightly damp. So I'm going to complete the skeleton frame next. With the skeleton frame now finished, the next thing to move on to is your brickwork. So I've put the brickwork inside the jig, and all we need now is to glue this in position. So I will add some glue to the back of here, put it in position, and make sure that it all butts up right against the edge of the jig, and that will put it in position. I'll allow that to dry, and then I'm going to use some of these paints from Artistes, different colors, to then add to a board, and then I'm just using a quick sponge, damp sponge, and dab in the different colors, and then I'll dab all over the brickwork to give different shades. Allow that to dry before then we move on and fit all the lintels, ledges and windows. So with a number of different colors, and obviously I've mixed them, as you can see, added reds, browns and yellows to make different color tones of brick. I've used a very thin brush and painted some individual bricks some different colors to give some different tones, and obviously I'm going to allow that to dry. I'll then give it a couple of coats of matte varnish, and then I'll mortar afterwards before continuing on to put the windows in. So I'm going to allow those to dry for a good hour or so, and then I'll give it a couple of coats of matte varnish. When you come to paint these little blighters, it's best to again do the double masking tape. These are the bottom lintels and these are the thinnest ones, and obviously these are going in that way, so put them down, face down. You're painting both sides and the top. Obviously the part that's facing down on the masking tape is the bit that's going to go inside the brickwork. There's 5 of those, and then obviously these are the top lintels, and again, so these ones are the thicker ones, and I've put them down on the masking tape, and you just need to paint the top and the sides and obviously the edges. I'm going to be using what am I going to be using? This stuff here, Precision Phoenix Weathered Concrete Matte. Seems to do the job quite well. I'll give it a couple of little light coats. Don't want to put too much on these, because obviously when you come to put them in the gaps, there's only a certain amount of room. I've left measurements for a small amount of paint, so be careful when you do it. So just light, obviously if you're spraying, if you use an airbrush, then obviously it would be a lot better, but I'm hand painting these, so I do light brushes, might even do a couple of light coats and just see how it gets on. But best way to paint them is on double-sided masking tape as shown. Now I've got both the double O gauge and the O gauge brick panels, and on the O gauge I've completed and fitted the top lintels. They're not glued in place, to be honest, with the paint, and they're just literally pushed in, and on the other side I make sure they are flush with the back. You could add some glue there to keep them in, but because this is being glued against a panel, I don't see them going anywhere. But you can always glue them in, and it's the same with the O gauge, double O gauge one. They're all painted, so I've literally got to fit them. When you come to fit your windows, depending on how much you've painted around the windows, you may need to file down the sides, edges of your windows to get them in. Don't force them in, otherwise you'll break them or they'll bow. So just test it to see if you can fit it in, and obviously they need to butt right up against the top lintel. If they're tight, just rub your side of your against some sandpaper and then just push it back in. But obviously you need to put all the top lintels in first and then add the windows. I would certainly suggest adding some glue around the outside frame of the windows. Don't really want those going anywhere. And then obviously then we can concentrate on doing the bottom ledges as well. So I'm going to complete those and we'll come back and show you when they're done. With the double O gauge version, you can put this inside your jig and obviously then fit your windows, and obviously these need to be flush with the bottom of the base of the jig. So when you turn them over, if I take it out and turn it over, those windows are flush with the back of the MDF, and then you can run some glue to just keep them in place. But use your jig to keep them in place and make sure that they are pushed right down. I just use a tiny piece of MDF and just make sure I'll go around the outside. It's all around the outside and flush, and then it's ready to glue when I've done all of them. So I've now completed the windows, lintels and ledges on both the 00 and O gauge. Depending again on how much you spray these as to whether they'll fit snugly. I had no issues at all with the window lintels. The edges of the windows were a little bit tight, so I have sanded just down the edges. So, and obviously the ledges were a little bit awkward as well, so I think it might be worth sort of like masking around the edge of the windows when you paint them, so try not to get too much paint on them. The 00 gauge ones just fit a treat. I didn't have to do any sanding, filing or anything, so obviously didn't perhaps put as much paint on those, but as you can see they're done. I've got to fit the glass on these before I put the back windows in. These I've got to put the windows in first before the glass, so those will be the next stage to do, but I'm going to most probably do the mortar on the bricks next and see how that comes out. So the windows, lintels and ledges have all been fitted to the 00 gauge front, and I've also gone around and painted some bricks in individual colours as a variant of tones. That's quite difficult to do in 00 gauge. I'm not going to do the mortar on this particular one. This is purely for demonstration purposes, but we'll move on now to fitting the glazing. Now, I think I previously mentioned the ones with the holes for the opening windows, you need to fit the glazing on the back, because we're going to fit the opening window to the back of the glazing. On the O gauge one you don't need to. It will fit to the back of the window, if I've got that correct. I have gone to town on the O gauge one and done all the brickwork mortar, and I've done different shades and different tones to give it the well-worn look. I've still got to do some weathering because, as you can see, the lintels and ledges and windows are still spotless, but the brickwork's a bit naff. But we're getting there on that one. But on the 00 gauge one we won't go to town and do all the mortar. So my next job is to fit the window glass to the opening windows. So your glass will come with a protective film, and obviously you need to take that off. So one side is a clear protective film, the other side is like a frosted sort of side. Once you take both of them off, you'll get your clear glass pane. Just make sure, just fit it around the edge to make sure it's flush. If not, just lightly file around the outside. These should be spot on, they're all laser cut, and I'm just going to add a thin amount of glue around the outside, and then around this window frame here, and I'm going to be using glue and glaze because it does dry clear. So I'll just add the bit of that and I'll show you after I've done that. When you've glued your windows in on this one and this one and they're just starting to dry, turn it over and fit it into the top of the skeleton frame to make sure that your window fits within the hole of the skeleton frame, otherwise you'll be in trouble. So I've just checked mine and mine's all nice and flush, so what I can do is I can take that back off, tip it upside down, allow them to fully dry before we go any further. Okay, so these are the two opening windows, and obviously the glass that goes inside them are extremely small, so they will be in a tiny little bag of some kind, and they should just pop in. But what I do is I just put a little bit of glue and glaze around the outside of the MDF frame and then pop these in because it does dry clear. And then obviously what I've now got to do is I've got to glue the side of this frame onto the small side section. So I'm going to do that. I'll most probably do that with super glue or some kind of bonding glue just to make it stay in one position, and then we'll try and be clever with some tweezers. Okay, so I've glued my windows to the side of the frame, and obviously now I've got to add that to the inside of the window. So this piece, this side here, if I can do it with my camera, that length there, so this will go against the back of the window, and obviously on the 00 gauge it will rest on the glass, and on the O gauge one you should be able to fit it just to the side of the window, and the glass frame should then go over it and fit nicely. Now that those two windows are dry, I can glue it to the face of the skeleton. So I'm going to add glue to the front of here, make sure I don't get it in the windows, and I'm just going to move that and put it on top, add some pressure, let it dry, and then once it's dry we can then use the other windows. We can remove the filament and literally we can put them in on the back, and they should just fit in there. But again, if you want, you can just add a bit of glue to keep them in place, but I haven't done on my previous kit because I thought maybe if you want to weather them, you can take the glass out just by poking it through with a cocktail stick, doing some weathering and then sticking it back in, so you can change the appearance of your windows over a period of time. So we'll glue this one next and then we'll come back. Okay, so like a fool, I've forgotten to add the window to the back of the glass, so I'll have to use tweezers, but I strongly recommend before you add your brickwork on is to add that back window on to this one and that one. It just means I've got to be a little bit more fiddly with the glass and those tiny little pieces there, but I'm sure we'll do it. But for you, try and do it before you stick that on, because it will make your life a lot easier. But that's looking good. So fitting those opening windows prior to putting them on, before you put that brickwork on the front, is a pain. So do make sure that you put those on. You can get them at the right angle, but you need a long pair of tweezers and some very small fingers to get those in. But I think that will do for this one. But as I said, put those on prior to fitting the front brickwork. It would make your life so much easier. It's time to remove the film backing from these last three windows, and then you can fit the glass in place. As mentioned, you can either add a bit of glue or just push it in, and hopefully it should just stay there from previous build, and that's what we're going to do next. The next job is to paint the gutter strip that goes on the top of the overlay of the brick. It is slightly wider than the top overlay, so you need to make sure you get it level with the top. I'm going to paint this in just a simple black, as normal guttering cladding was black back then, so I'm going to cover that. I'm not going to bother to prime it. I've got an acrylic paint, a couple of coats of black paint will do this on this piece. You can prime it and paint it if you want to, but on this cage I'm just going to go over with a couple of coats of black, let it dry, and then I'm going to glue it in place. The corrugated card that we use for the roof now needs to be primed. You only need to prime the top side, you don't need to prime the underneath. We've primed the top of the roof, so that will adhere to the back of the card nicely, but it's just priming the top. I'm going to use a normal grey primer, and then you can obviously weather it accordingly. So I'm going to go down to the workshop and prime that, ready for sticking onto the roof. The side gutter strip is now painted black and dried, and all I need to do is fit it to the top of the brick buttress. Behind it obviously is the grey card roof, and I'll glue that onto the panel once the gutter strip has dried. The corrugated roof has only been primed in grey. I will add some colours and different tones to it once it's glued on, but I'm going to add the glue to the roof. Now I'm not going to glue the roof down, so we want to make sure that we don't get any glue anywhere near those holes, because if you do, you'll end up gluing your roof on. So liberate the glue all over and then brush it across, and then fit this accordingly so it's fit flush on the edge. And you should find you have a small overhang, which is enough if you do want to put a gutter on the building, then that will allow that to fit. And there we have our roof done. It's in place. I'm just going to allow that to dry now. I'll let it dry overnight. I'll then take it off, just make sure it's all stuck properly, and then we'll add some different colour tones to the roof. and make the windows dirty, the lintels and ledges, and she's as good as done. So hopefully you've enjoyed building the kit. So this is the 00 version. I have been using the O gauge throughout the video as well. I still need to carry on finishing that one, but they both build exactly the same. So thanks for purchasing the kit, and any questions, don't hesitate to contact us through the website on the product support page, or through Facebook Messenger on the Railway Laser Lines Facebook group.